Welcome to the Nickolas and Natali Show, where we chat with entrepreneurs, experts, and entertainers to help you live a more fulfilling life and take your business to the next level. Today, we're chatting with Lael Cook. Lael is an investor and growth partner. He helps seven-figure business owners systemize their business so they can make an exit at the business's peak value. This episode will be completely uninterrupted. I'm talking absolutely ad-free. No ads here. We're not letting them in. They're knocking on the door and we're saying no, but here's the deal. If we're going uninterrupted, before we dive in, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Share this episode with a friend that you know would benefit from it. These shares and reviews, they help me reach out to guests, which in turn will bring more value to you on how to live a fulfilling life and level up your business. Riddle of the week: what happens when a strawberry gets run over while crossing the street? Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out. That was the intro. Now here is the episode. Here's where I want to start.
Cool.
You have a couple core values that guide how you structure your life, your goals, your business, one of which is connection. How does connection feed into how you approach opportunities? And how did you find out this was one of your core values?
It's funny. I found out this was a core value at a goal-setting retreat. So this book called The One Thing, Gary Keller, Jay Papasan, they wrote some years ago. And my wife and I went to this retreat, and one of the sessions was about core values. And they give you this deck of cards to try to identify. So you're going through, it's like taking all this time to identify like which one like resonates with you. And that was the first one that came up, was connection. I was like, you know what? This has been driving my conversations, my relationships, business, all of that has been behind like my decisions, but I just didn't realize it. I didn't put a name to it until that retreat. That's how I found out. And I've seen that connection has really just been a part of my life for a long time. And it's because I do genuinely care for people. I feel like I have a heart for people. And even in sales, I know we're going to get into this later, but even when it comes to sales and just business overall, one of the things that people lack is just empathy, like overall. I think that influences the conversations that I have, the relationships that I build, is always aiming for the connecting piece first. Like, how can I connect with this person and find that common ground? And it's genuine. It's coming from a sincere place.
Yeah. And I think I would imagine the opposite end would be to build a relationship with the end goal in mind that would taint the connection first mindset. And are you also telling me that you pulled from a deck of cards and you said the first one was yours and you didn't look at the rest? Is that what I mean?
No. I wish it was that simple. Man, I don't even remember how many cards was in there, but it's this big stack of cards. And all of them can apply in some way, right? So I'm going through it. It's like 50 cards the first time around.
Oh, man.
Then it's 30 cards the next time around. Then it's 15 the next time around. Then it's 10. And then it's 7. Now I'm looking at all 7 to say, okay, well, what are my top 3? So it was a great process. I feel like that was one of my biggest takeaways from last year, is understanding what my top 3 core values are. That happens to be number 1.
I know one of the other 2 is simplicity.
Yeah.
Tell me about how simplicity shows up in your career, and what's the third one?
I'll give you the third one now. The third one is generosity. So if it was to go in order, it would be connection, generosity, and then simplicity. To answer your question, I've always found that I enjoy simple concepts and like to live my life simple as well. I had a mentor in Atlanta. This is when I first was getting into my sales career. I was selling ADT security systems, and we're knocking on doors, right? And he had this training that he would go through with everybody. And he always used to say, and I'm probably going to jack this up, but he said that the genius minds make complex things simple. And he was explaining these concepts and breaking it down to us to where it's like, you know what, I really can understand that. And from that experience and learning from him, when it comes to business, I'm like, I need to understand this. Is it simple to understand? And I'm trying to rack my brain to, if it sounds complicated, it's like, okay, I'm drawn away from that. But how can we explain this simply? Because really, it's about communication sometimes too. It's like sometimes something may not be complex, but someone makes it complex because of how they're explaining it. So, in business and in sales and in my life overall, I'm like, hey, if I can keep things as simple as possible, that makes things a whole lot easier for me.
I think that's great. I almost An example that comes to my mind is when you're explaining a concept to someone and they're like, I don't get it at all. And then one person walks up and says like one sentence and they're like, oh, why didn't you just say that? You know, like breaking down things that seem complex or even if they
Yeah,
are and making them simple and digestible.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
How does the generosity play into the factor? Is the generosity in the sense of this expands my growth capacity? Like in my mind, I want to earn more so I can be more generous, or is it more so in the resources and non-tangible, like time?
Yeah, I mean, all of it can be like categorized as generosity. Part of the reason why I do what I do is to give on a bigger level, whether it's my time, whether it's my money, whether it's resources. At the same time, giving bigger is not necessarily my motivation to be generous. I feel it's at my heart to be generous because of the first part, that first core value of connection, of me genuinely caring about people. And so that was another example of something that I saw over my life. Actually, when I was going through that exercise, and I keep looking over here because I have all three of them right here on
Nice.
my desk. Generosity was the first one that I picked out of the core values. It was the easiest one for me to
Resonate
choose
with.
because, yeah, because I've seen that over my life where I could be somewhere and just give to somebody, whether it's a store or give some time or give some encouragement. I remember I went to Tennessee for a birthday. I went to Nashville and I was downtown. Now, first of all, Nashville is amazing. So I'm walking down on this, I don't remember the main street, but any Tennesseans out there, you probably know. I'm walking on this main street and I'm a musician, right? So I'm already intrigued
Yeah. Live music
because,
central.
man, I'm walking down and I see a band on one level and you look up, there's more music. I hear another
Yeah.
band.
Yeah.
I look above that and there's another band. It's like amazing, right? So I'm walking down and I'm seeing all these people. I'm seeing the wealth of the area, if you will. And I remember seeing this guy outside of one of these venues or buildings just sitting down. He wasn't even asking anybody for money, but you could just tell he was in a bad way. He was just sitting down, like looking out in the street, like with this dazed look on his face. And it's my birthday. And I remember coming up next to him and sitting down on the ground with him and just talking to him. And I really don't remember everything that we talked about, but I gave him some encouragement and I remember putting some money into his hand. And the guy's face was just stunned. Like somebody took the time to not just give me money, but also like have a conversation with me and treat me like a real person. My parents raised me in different to give like of my time and energy and money. And so I feel like it's been a part of my life over time. So seeing that as an adult, right? Like seeing that play out like in real life. That's just one example. It's like, you know what? I know for sure that generosity is just something that I'm prone to do.
And it has an immediate impact in a way. Like there's every
Yeah.
time that you're generous, there's the consequences of your generosity are shown. And I think even in a moment like that, the immediate response is his face, like his reaction to the generosity. And who knows how long that sustained him for the coming time, just that interaction. But I think that's powerful. I like that a lot.
Well, what's funny is seeing like the opposite, right? There's been times I've been with people or even I've given, whether it's food or matter of fact, it's mainly food sometimes where you like want to give it to somebody like, I don't
Yeah,
want
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And it's like, well, does that stop me from being generous though? That's the point I'm bringing up.
uh
It's like, no, like even though that wasn't the reaction I expected, at the end of the day, it's still up to me to be generous no matter what the reaction is. Because if I'm expecting a certain reaction and don't get it, then that means
you give
if
for the
I'm
wrong
aiming,
reasons.
yeah, if I'm
Yeah.
aiming for that, that's the wrong motivation.
Yeah. 100%. That's great. Let's fast forward a tiny bit, maybe not too much, just a little bit. We're gonna get into the part of your sales career where you're making a transition out of one phase and into the sales more mindset. I want to know about the bad habits you had when you first started in sales. I know we've talked previously, and there were times maybe it came off a little abrasive, possibly. That might be one of
Sure.
them.
Absolutely, man. That was one of the first things that I was learning is one of my mentors, he was telling me it's okay for you not to have a filter per se, but you just need to do it with tact. So I forgot the tact part. I remember I had a call. I scheduled a call with a CEO on his team. So what we were looking to do was build a partnership. And I had met with his team the week before for like an hour and some change. Like I'm going through everything, like giving them all of these details. And they're like, you know what, we're on board. You know, when we talk to our president or CEO or whatever, everything should be all good. So I'm thinking that I'm getting on this call and just going to give him some high level points. And so he gets on the call and he's like, yeah, it's great to meet with you. I talk with my team. I'd love to hear what you got.
From the top. Oh, man.
So I'm on the call like confused. So I give him some high level, like I hit him with like 3 points.
Yeah.
And now I'm quiet because I'm like,
that's all I got, man.
Yeah, he should know because his team. So he was like, yeah, I got that. But, I was hoping that you would give me the whole spiel. And I was like, man, I gave the spiel to your team. It sounds like you were unprepared for this call.
Oh my gosh.
And he was so mad. He said, you know what? Sounds like you're right. And hangs up, right?
Oh, dang.
So his
good response.
So his team reaches out to my partner's CEO of the company that I'm working with.
Yeah.
Tells him the situation, basically like, yeah, I thought we had something. I'm like, I thought we had something too. So I ended up having a conversation with my guy, and he was like, look, man, you're right though. He wasn't prepared for the call. But there's a way that you go about having that conversation. At the end of the day, just give him what he wants. Because do you rather have the sale or do you rather be right? And it's like, okay, I was right in that instance, but I missed the sale because I was too abrasive, right? So that was one of my favorite lessons that I learned. It's just like, there's a way that you can go about being frank with people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can be direct without being confrontational in a way. Yeah.
Right.
You're not prepared, man.
Well, and a lot of people think, I've had this conversation with my wife, is that some people think that when you have the conversation with somebody and being direct, that it is confrontational. And I don't believe that that's true. It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
From what I've seen in your conversations, it's like approaching these things with honesty and transparency. But I think what makes things confrontational is the honesty with an attack behind it. Like the intention is to hit them personally, which I don't think that's the best strategy.
Sure. Well, and when I look at that, I feel like that scenario, I was just giving you that example. I feel like there was a hint of that, like in my tone and everything. It's like, I'm right, you're wrong, you're an idiot. Even though you're a CEO, you should have been prepared. And it's like you said, it's just the wrong approach.
Putting people at odds. Let's dive into the strategy we've come to know and love then.
Okay.
I want to break down some of the crucial elements of sales in regards to discovering if a customer is actually prepared to buy. And from what I've learned from you, that involves knowing their time frame, their budget, if they're a decision maker, and if their pain point is something that the service can solve for them. Can you break down the importance of those categories, and if I missed anything, and how you go about approaching getting that information from the buyer?
Let me answer the last part of that question first. Depending on how someone's marketing is set up, a lot of that can be addressed before you even have the conversation. That said, there's a couple of ways to do it. I can do it like before the conversation, like the scheduled meeting, like via text or a quick phone call. And I can also do it within that conversation too. Really what I'm looking for is 3 things. 1, do they believe that we can help them? 2, do they want help right now? Or are they really just looking for information? And then 3, if they do want help, are they financially able and willing to invest to get the help that they need? So that's why it's important, I feel, to address it was one of the things that I learned that I felt like that what made me different than other salespeople when I first got started is that I wasn't necessarily looking to close the deal. I was looking to disqualify them. Not to be mean or anything like that, but I was just looking for reasons to determine, okay, is this person a good fit? You know? And so that's where those questions arose from, and then that's where I simplified it to understand, okay, if these three things don't align, like even before we get into a deep sales conversation, if you will, then they're probably not a good fit for what we have.
I like how you approach those conversations because I do think there is some merit to saying, I know our service is this good. I need to know if you're the right fit for the service because I'm not going to waste my services performing this action on just anybody. But I'm curious how the dynamic plays out when they have objections about your service, but you're still qualifying them and they're qualifying you. You know, how do you handle those?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is throughout the conversation is to eliminate objections ahead of time, right? You've seen like in our conversations when it comes to the sale or the close, if you will, is that it's laid out in a way to where you're addressing certain things before they can bring them up. An example, there are some salespeople, they get to the end of the call and they're like, well, you know, I got to talk to my wife about it.
Right at the end.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you went through all of this, everybody's feeling good. And it's like, you know what? This sounds great. I got to talk to my wife.
Yeah.
Well, if 15 minutes in, I had asked a simple question like, yo, Nickolas, who else makes decisions like this with you?
Mm-hmm. My wife.
There you go. Now it's taking me a different path, right? Because I can ask you, hey, should your wife be a part of this conversation? Matter of fact, if you want, we can all three schedule a call and talk later on this week. Right? Like I like to deal with things before they can become an objection. And that example is one of them. So with pre-qualifying, if you will, a prospect to understand those three questions that I asked earlier, when they meet those three criteria, then it's a little bit easier to navigate the conversation because at least you know that those won't come up later on, right?
They don't have those in their back pocket ready. Part of it is, I think, like we've discussed, how much confidence they have in that you can fulfill what you're saying you can do. And the other thing is, I think sometimes it's a defense mechanism.
Sure.
People want a second to think of something, so they're just like, I need to talk to my wife. I need to check my bank account, or just like whatever excuse they can come up with in the moment.
On a deeper level too, you know, a lot of people are not ready to do what it takes to get to the future that they see for themselves. Right. But that's part of our role in the sales conversation is to provide them clarity, because once it's clear that your product, your solution, your service can bridge the gap and get them to their desired state, then they'll buy from you.
When they have that confidence.
Right.
Talk me through the pitch. How do you craft a quality pitch? And I think from what I know, a pitch is supposed to be the unique identifiers that help you stand out from what your competitors are doing. But what I think you do that's really great is you take the conversation and the nuances and the pain points that they give you, and you intertwine them into the pitch itself. So if you were to create a quality pitch, what would be your process?
There's three parts to it. Like you've seen that sales framework that we talked about. If I had to break it down, it would be one being like the promise, essentially like what results can you get them in a specific time frame. Two is like the pillars of that promise. And so that's your favorite part, right? Because that's essentially giving them the step by step on how they're going to get from that A to B solution. And then the third, I would say, would be the delivery aspect of it, which is, okay, this is how it's going to look when you work with us, and this is how we're going to deliver the results that I'm promising to you.
I also have found that people feel much more comfortable knowing you do have a process rather than saying, we can cater to all your needs. What do you need? And we'll figure it out along the way. It's more so like, you have a need and a problem. This is our process that solves it. I feel like there's confidence in that.
Yeah, well, and there, like we've talked about, there's going through the pitch, there's emotional buy-in as well when you tie it to their problem. Because once they're hearing from you clarity on how this solves that specific issue that they're having, they're bought in to say, you know what, I can totally see the results that they're promising based on how this process is outlined.
Yeah, this is very true. Do you want to touch on the 3 E's sales framework and what the 3 E's stand for and what's that all about?
Yeah, sure. So let me give you the core of it first, because I mentioned state, or like buying state earlier,
Yeah.
and really the goal is to diagnose their problem and prescribe a solution. But that comes from having the clarity. They need the clarity because that clarity on what you're providing for them and how you can help creates that atmosphere for them to buy. So you have their current state, right? And they have a desired state as well. So the more clear that that gap is between the two places and you are presented as a solution, the more that they are looking to actually solve their issue with the solution that you presented. So the 3 E's. The first one is to examine their state. Essentially, you're trying to find out what's going on within their business, why they scheduled the call, understanding their pain and their challenges. The second E is exploring solutions with them. Really looking to understand what results are they looking for, like when they want them, and what they are, and also to help them to see that they need to take responsibility for where they are, and why they shouldn't stay where they are. And then the third E is to empower them to take action. That's essentially where you're making the pitch, making the offer, and enrolling them into your product or service.
That's great. I want to touch on this. This might be fast forwarding the conversation a little bit.
Sure.
But something I'm curious your thoughts on is how to hold people accountable without making them feel like you're judging them. You know what I mean? Because I agree with you that people hop on a sales call and they say, I want this result. And then you're like, okay, that's great. Are you willing to commit to 6 weeks to do it? And they're like, you just don't, you think this and that of me. And that's like not the case. I just want you to have the results you want. What do you think the fine line is there in accountability versus judgment?
I mean, I think the easiest way is to ask questions, because throughout the conversation, you can hold them accountable to what they've already said. Sometimes you'll get to the end of the call and they're like, well, yeah, I need to think about it, right? And it's like, well, you told me earlier that there's no reason why you wouldn't do this right now if blah, 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 right? So like how you were talking about earlier about being direct, you can be direct with your questions too, and even pre-frame them by saying, hey, can I just be honest with you? Or, hey, can I ask you an honest question?
Yeah.
And matter of fact, those are questions that like I would add. I know that we talked about like what phrases and stuff that I like to use.
Yeah.
That's an example of a question that kind of is a softer question before asking a more direct question to get permission.
Mm-hmm.
So bring this full circle. I would ask questions so they don't feel judged, and just being honest with them. I think people really do appreciate transparency because as the closer or the salesperson, if you will, you hear it anyway, right? Like you hear that there's misalignment. So address that cordially and bring them back into the buying pocket.
I think there's so many good phrases that I still need to add to my repertoire on my sales call. I'm curious if you have any more on the top of your head. I wrote some down. Like, what's your real question? I think is so good. Like somebody's like, it's like, well, how do you do that? And you're like, what's your real question? I'm not sure you can do that. It's like getting to the truth of the matter. Or another one that you use that is great is, I like the language you used. And then, like you're saying, you repeat back to them what they already said they wanted. What phrases come to your mind right now of like, you got to have those in your pocket?
Yeah. Before I answer that, what's funny is, so that statement that I made that you just mentioned about what's your real question, or like asking that question, I don't feel like everybody can pull that off because it just works for my personality. So I'm saying that as an encouragement to where like I never saw that question or those statements like in a sales script anywhere.
Right.
But they came naturally throughout the conversation, where it's an example of what I mentioned earlier about not necessarily having a filter, but still addressing what the real issue is, right? And so to answer your question, one I mentioned earlier is, can I ask you an honest question? Another statement that I like is, tell me more about that. Because sometimes people will say something and then be quiet. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, tell me more about that. Simple. It's like a command so you can get more information. And then another one is similar to that. I like to ask, what do you mean by that? Because I don't want to make any assumptions. So I ask them direct, hey, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's better than letting the gray area take over and end up down the wrong path.
This is not a question or a statement, but I think one thing that is underutilized in sales conversations is silence. I don't feel like it's used often enough because it's uncomfortable if you're not used to it. But I do think there are some times where you don't need to say anything, and you let that internal tension or internal pressure be built in for them to say something first. Sometimes it's a question that they actually need to ask, not you.
I know there you have a built-in silence. It says shut up in the framework after you say the amount post-pitch.
Yeah.
But what are other times that you should utilize silence? Like what's a key indicator? Is it when they're not providing enough information, or is it I love that. It's like say the price and shut up. I think that's really good too.
It depends on the instance. Like sometimes during like objections, there may be some time for silence there. Definitely when you're talking, like after you made the pitch, like you mentioned, like with the offer, you want silence because they're essentially looking to work that out in their head, like how that will work for them as far as paying and enrolling. There are some times where I ask a question and they give me an answer, but it's not enough and I'm still quiet. Those are the occasions that come to mind off the top of my head as far as where silence I feel could work well.
I feel like those are all opportune times. Is there anything on the sales front that we haven't hit yet that you're like, people need to know about this? They're not doing enough about this thing in sales. Anything that's firing you up right now that people need to know about?
Man, I really do think so. Besides what I just mentioned about silence, which I think is super important, I also think empathy, like I was saying earlier, because there are so many different sales teams out there, salespeople, where they are essentially looking to force someone into purchasing their product or service when it may genuinely not be the right time, or they may really not be a good fit. And so I think it's understanding where they are, like having empathy, having a genuine conversation. And then the other part of that is just being ethical, being morally right. And I think you could have like the worst sales pitch, if you will, and somebody that is really motivated to buy and really believes in your solution, they're still going to buy from you anyway. Taylor Welch, he's the founder of Traffic and Funnels. He talks about how when he was first getting started with Traffic and Funnels, this guy ended up being a client. He closed them over the phone, and the client actually ended up walking him through how to take his payment.
That's hilarious.
But he was such a believer in what Taylor had to provide to him that he didn't care about that. He's like, okay, I'm going to walk you through this, blah, blah, blah. But hey, at the end of the day, I believe in the result that I'm going to get.
Yeah, I'm going to show you how to take my money. That's great. To your point there, I think that's true. And I think sales calls does have a bit of that connotation because there's a lot of people that are pressure selling people when those people shouldn't be buying. I think it makes it difficult on honorable salesmen who want to do an ethical thing, and people are meeting them with like some sort of animosity. And I think it's difficult for people who are interested in buying, but they're also not interested in being told what to buy immediately and pressured into it. So I agree with that. I think empathy is needed.
You know, you've heard the phrase of people love to buy, they don't like to be sold. I was in a meeting earlier today with some investor colleagues, and one of the guys was saying, you need to be selling but not be seen selling. So that's another way of selling or saying that I hadn't heard before. But the thing is, you don't have to create this pressure for someone to buy anything when you are genuinely asking them questions and walking them through like the sales process, because the pressure is created internally with them,
right?
Not an external pressure from you. So when that internal pressure is created, they're looking to resolve that tension, and they resolve that tension, or they should resolve it by purchasing what you have to offer.
Yeah, I agree with that. It has to be an internal decision. I imagine most people would probably regret a buyer. Buyer remorse probably happens immediately when they're like, man, that person made me buy that. It's like, oh man, that sucks. Got bullied into my first high ticket offer. That was the episode. You just listened to it. Be sure to tune in to part 2. Lael will be dropping even more information, insights, and perhaps I say knowledge bombs. Part 2 is releasing on Monday at 6 a.m. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Share this episode with a friend that needs to hear it. It takes 5 seconds, one tap of the thumb. It's great use of your screen time. Be sure to reach out to me on Instagram at Nickolas Natali. Slide in my DMs. I reply to all of them, and I love debriefing these episodes. The real reason you're still here is you want to know the answer to the riddle of the week, and I can't blame you for that. What happens when a strawberry gets run over while crossing the street? Traffic jam. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on Monday, 6 a.m. Goodbye. Have a great weekend. Be kind, be strong, be disciplined, and be obsessed.